Well, mine's kind of for everybody. It's about the bail and the arrest numbers. Seems like there's been some discrepancy. I know when the Times Union reported the numbers, the Office of Court Administration apparently shut the website down and now we're revising them. I'm just wondering if you guys, what do you make of that? You think it's a simple mistake?
Karen, I appreciate the question. In all seriousness, I think we all kind of chuckle because this isn't the first issue with numbers and reporting that New York State has had just in the past 12 months, especially when it comes to deaths and victims, whether it's the nursing home data, which I will leave for another day, and we've talked about it a lot. But now we have yet another, and then people wonder why don't people trust government agencies? This is something you have to get right. And there's probably a kid sitting in college that could have got it right, and somehow we couldn't get it right. Something this important. By the way, a letter that Leader Barkley and I sent to the Office of Court Administration over this months ago, never heard an answer. So they've been working on this, I suspect, for a long time. So just the fact that they went down and they had to put up revised numbers, I think really brings in a lot of doubt, a lot of suspicion related to this. And as you heard from Assemblyman Riley, the truth is the new numbers, when you take into everything, are worse.
Yeah. Just to add a little bit, I mean, putting aside the statistics, I mean, that's important to prove our point. But I think you talk to anybody, it's common sense. It's common sense. You don't let dangerous criminals back out in the street. I don't need 100 statistics to prove to me that's a bad policy. So we'll see what they do, but I'm not optimistic we're going to get the straight story.
Just for the county executive, Sackley, City and State, this rally is all about law and order politics. How do you reconcile your appearance here with your recent executive orders encouraging local officials to disobey state?
Well, the United States Supreme Court is considering right now whether or not mandates are constitutional. My opinion is that it's a mandate, so it's applicable, I believe, to what we're doing in Nassau County. So the question is, when you make a mandate that infringes upon people's constitutional rights, you have to have a compelling reason. And we have a governor who hasn't told us what the metric was to start people to wearing masks, and she still hasn't told us what the metric is to say we don't have to wear masks again. So let's see the data, and basically I'm very comfortable in my position. I'm representing the people in Nassau County, okay? And I'm talking about choice, which is what we should be talking about. What I'm saying in my county, I want to give school boards the choice. I want to give businesses the choice as to whether or not to require to wear masks. And again, the governor is very selective in what she thinks should be enforced and what state law is and what it should be prosecuted, et cetera. She threatened to remove school board members. She threatened to remove funding from our schools in Nassau County. But she hasn't threatened the Manhattan District Attorney, who refuses to prosecute criminals under the law. It's inconsistent.
Senator, I'm just curious, what are you proposing exactly here? A return to the previous bail system, or what we heard from law enforcement earlier, or last year I should say, where you completely eliminate cash bail and replace it with a dangerousness-only remanding standard?
So Daryl, I've said this to others, so I'm a big believer in never negotiating with myself, right? So obviously, I would favor a complete repeal of cashless bail. Let's get back to where we were, and then if we want to have a real dialogue, you know who wasn't included in that dialogue, and you all know this because you covered it. I know you did. The people who are standing up here, members of law enforcement, were never a part of the discussion about how can we make the system better, how can we make the system fairer. No, I can promise you, you heard from Senator Gallivan, you've heard, the men and women who wear the uniform, they want a fair system. They can tell you how to make it better. Our district attorneys, I mean, the ones who actually believe in putting people behind bars that commit crimes, I mean, they could tell you how to make it better, but they weren't. It was people like Alvin Bragg, it was advocates, and my colleagues. So meaning the decision was made before they even made the decision about which direction we're going to go. So I think we got to get back to square zero, and I think we can come up with a system that addresses financial inequities or other inequities, but takes into account dangerousness, allows judges discretion to make decisions that we elect them very often to do, which is to protect the public and to keep a dangerous person behind bars if that's needed, or protect that person from themselves.
And when it comes to the original intent, what was stated, even with Raise the Age, was about racial disparities and things of that nature. And over the past, 8 months specifically, actually, there seems to have been a eureka moment where people went, they're going to have to stop committing crimes in order for this to actually happen. So, for investment in programs, like I spoke to the Capital Area Boys and Girls Club, and they're like, diversion for youth who may be street life involved, where there are parental deficiencies, is something that the state and cities are not investing in at an appropriate level, because your 16 to 24 is generally where the crime is happening.
Sure.
So that being said, for a Safer New York, would your conference support something like investing in those programs for the youth to keep them occupied?
I'm going to say yes, and not only that, I'm going to say we have. I know when I was chair of mental health and developmental disabilities, our conference then and our conference now has always supported investments in programs or services that prevention, right? Trying to keep somebody from going down a path of criminality, trying to keep someone out of the criminal justice system. Those are, you can do two things. I think there was this notion that the only way we can properly invest in those programs is to defund the police, as if somehow taking money from those who are protecting us is somehow, that's the only way we can also invest. We have done both. Cities are doing both. Counties do both, meaning they have the obligation of, I got to make sure that the folks that protect us have the resources. But I tell you what, they don't want to be locking up 16-year-olds who should be in a mental health facility instead. They don't want to be locking up somebody who really needs a drug program instead. But that's who's called very often when there's a drug overdose. It's the police officer. It isn't the social worker. It's the police officer. When there's a domestic violence case, it isn't a social worker. Our colleagues talk about domestic violence. People elected always talk about domestic violence. We've got to protect women. Who do you think shows up when there's a domestic violence call? It's a police officer. So we need to remember that when we're having this dialogue about things we care about, mental health, prevention, domestic violence, we got to remember that at the end of the day, on the street level, it's a man or woman wearing a uniform and a badge that is very often the first person on the scene that is making the difference in those areas. And so we need to invest in both. But yes, Daryl, to your question, the answer would be yes.
And last thing,
Oh, yeah, do you want
Can I
to?
just point to one? Thanks, Rob. Just one point of that. We talked a little bit here about the victims. I think that's important, but particularly with Raise the Age, it's the people that commit the crimes, putting them back on the streets. They're almost a victim themselves. I mean, that's not answering that's not providing justice to anybody. It just causes, they run into more trouble themselves. So, it sort of irritates me sometimes, particularly when it comes to Raise the Age. We got to let, where the system's jamming these poor kids up. Well, by not giving them services or not getting them off the street, they're just as much of a victim as the people they may have committed a criminal act against.
and when it comes to the reforms that were due by April of last year from the former governor, it was sort of sold to us as a part of public safety. If there's sort of a cooperation, then that will in turn lead to lower crime rates. Has there been any measurable impact, positive or negative, on those reforms from anyone who may have a stake in that?
I haven't seen any data or any metrics made available to me, Daryl, that would lead me to believe that it is. If it's out there, again, it hasn't been made available to me. I can't speak for everyone up here. But I do think it's, as a follow-up to your other question, too, about the argument about racial disparities, I would argue that the victims of all these crimes we're talking about, they are victims of color and minorities in many, many cases. So I don't know how that's any social justice, that we're creating more victims in minority communities, in poor communities. I don't know if that's justice for them. Maybe it's justice for the people committing them, but it's injustice for the rest of us. So I would add that as well. Any other questions on bail?
Josh.
Hey, Josh.
The governor didn't mention bail reform in her State of the State, as you guys mentioned. But in her State of the State book, she did mention pretrial reform and not enough necessary implementation tools for that. Where do you and Leader Barkley stand on what the governor is currently working on in the budget of the pretrial reforms and the necessary services there? What type of reforms would you look to support?
Well, again, what I'll say is, as sort of a follow-up or similar to what I answered earlier, our conference has always supported investment in programs that are going to keep people out of jail. What we are not for is once someone has committed a crime to just say, well, we failed this person, we're going to just give them a pass this time. I mean, you heard from the county executive, one of those individuals, he was called with an illegal weapon, no bail, out the next day. What do we think he was going to do with that illegal weapon? So, you know, I think that there's a difference. Yes, we can support, you know, pretrial programs. Obviously, you know, we got to work out the price tag like we do with everything we do here in Albany, and we'll see what that price tag is and where our colleagues fall on that. But I don't think it's a this or that. I think we can do these reforms or these investing in programs and services and still make sure that people who break the law multiple times are held to account. We owe that to everybody across the state of New York.
You know, the only thing I agree with what Leader Ort said, I think our conference probably agrees with that too. The only thing I would mention, we don't want to take what they've done in New York City. As I went through those statistics earlier, you know, up to 50% of people are recidivist with
Right.
crimes, with misdemeanors. I think it was 38% for violent felonies. So that's one system we're not going to try to copy. I hope that's not what the governor's hoping to do.
Yeah, if it's happening in New York City, we're not interested in copying it here, generally speaking. Well, real quick, I will, is there any other on topic before we move to off topic? Okay.
So yesterday, the district lines were voted down by the Senate Assembly. What do you expect going forward? Do you think that process is going to end up in the hands of the legislature? And what do you think that's going to yield if it does?
What do I expect? You know, I know for a lot of people at home, this is like, you know, we're talking about bail, something very, obviously very, I think people can wrap their mind around criminal justice. This is usually a very inside baseball issue, redistricting, reapportionment, whatever you want to call it, gerrymandering. We had hoped, I'll speak for myself, I don't want to speak for Nestor, but I think I speak for most people up here. We had hoped that the Independent Redistricting Commission, that process worked and was successful in yielding a fair compromise map. Fair, I think, being the key word. But here's something I want to stress. That's not just about what Rob Ort wanted. It turns out that's what the people of New York wanted because they voted for it. Yesterday on the floor, one of my colleagues said, well, this was drawn up by the Republicans when they were in the majority years ago. It was actually drawn up by the people in New York. It was put on the ballot for referendum. Just like the three initiatives that were defeated this past year, this one succeeded. This one the people did want. But clearly the will of the voters is not high on the priority list of my colleagues across the aisle. That's why they voted all the maps down. That's why they are not interested, as you could almost tell from his comments, in this process working. They want it to go to the legislature where they will have the pen. And what's frustrating about that to me is that they're disregarding the will of the voters. Voters want to select their politicians. They don't want politicians to select their voters. Obviously, my colleagues across the aisle either don't care about that. That's why they're also pushing legislation that flies in the face of the propositions that just failed less than 7 weeks ago. And so my expectation is going to go back to the IRC. I am hopeful, and if they're watching this or listening, I would call on them. Do the job that the people of New York wanted you to do. Do the job that the people of New York expect you to do, which is to create one map, a fair map that has input from both sides. I voted for the one map, the only map that had any input from both sides. The other map, Plan A, was the input of one side. Plan B was input from both sides. It was not perfect. We're not going to get a perfect map. I can promise you whatever map comes out will not be perfect. But I think a map that comes from the IRC will be better than a map that comes out of one-party gerrymandered maps. But they have it for the next 15 days. Hopefully they can come to a consensus map, and then we'll discuss and debate and see what that map comes back as.
This is obviously very nationally significant. New York has 7 Republican reps and it's one of a very blue state. Those lines were drawn by a judge.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, what do you see in terms of states here? And do you see a partisan element? Do you feel that you'll get a fair shake if it goes to the legislature? Like tell me about the big one. Because you're right, this is broccoli, but you're a big.
Yes, yes, correct, and that's what I was trying to sort of. That was the point I did want to make, and maybe I didn't make it greatly, very well. But yes, it's broccoli. It's boring stuff to a lot of people, but the impact of this has very real implications. Quite frankly, on the things we're talking about right here, and on whether we can, you know, get changes to certain laws or stop future legislation that we feel is harmful to the state of New York. So, do I feel we'll get a fair shake? You know, I'd like to think we would. I'm not holding my breath. I think, you know, if it goes to the legislature, they're going to do. It's one-party control. They have supermajorities in both houses. I would expect they will draw lines that will benefit them. I don't know that. That's why I think the IRC process is important, because I think that could be a different outcome. But if it goes to the legislature, I expect we would see what you see in maybe even some other states where you have one-party control. And that would be greatly disappointing to me. But again, I think the people in New York should take interest in this because you voted for a process that was supposed to be fundamentally different. You voted for a process that took away the map drawing from the legislature, and it's going to end up potentially back there. And I think the voters should know that, and I think they would be disappointed and upset. Maybe not surprised, because they've come to maybe expect these things from Albany, but they should be disappointed and upset.
Any other off-topic questions? All right, we're done.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Lita. Appreciate it.
See you, Senator.